The night Corbin Whitfield walked into the Fairmont ballroom and saw Mara Stanton standing alone near the coat check, hands clasped in front of her like she was bracing for something, he almost turned around and left. He didn't. He never did when it came to her. She hadn't noticed him yet. That was the only reason he allowed himself to look, really look, the way he never let himself do in public. She was wearing a pale gray dress that was clearly not bought for this occasion, the kind of dress you pull out of the back of a closet and hope passes. Her hair was pinned up, but a strand had come loose near her left ear, and she hadn't fixed it. She probably didn't know. She was too busy staring at the doors to the main hall, like they might bite her if she walked through them. Corbin had been in rooms like this his entire adult life. Rooms where the flowers cost more than some people's rent, where the champagne was chosen by someone whose entire job was choosing champagne. He had stopped finding them impressive about 15 years ago. Tonight, he was only here because the groom, Philip Grantham, had personally called him 3 times. They'd gone to school together, Philip and him. They were not close. The fact that Philip had called 3 times told Corbin that the invitation was less about friendship and more about optics. Having the CEO of Whitfield Capital in the room made the room look a certain way. Corbin had come anyway. He came because he'd learned, a long time ago, that showing up mattered even when you didn't feel like it. He was heading toward the bar when Mara finally moved. She squared her shoulders, the way someone does when they've had a conversation with themselves and lost, and she pushed through the doors. Corbin followed at a distance. Old habit. The room was already full. A string quartet was playing something he didn't recognize near the far wall, and the tables were set with ivory linens and what looked like actual crystal. Philip Grantham came from old money and had recently acquired new money, and the room reflected both in a way that was, in Corbin's professional opinion, slightly excessive. He spotted Philip immediately. Hard to miss. Philip was tall and loud and stood at the center of any room the way people do when they've been told their whole lives that the center was where they belonged. He had his arm around a woman with dark hair and a ring that caught the chandelier light from across the room. That would be Lisette, the fiancée, the one Philip had left Mara for. Corbin had never met Lisette. He had never met Mara either, not formally, but he knew the story. Small world, the world of people who moved in these circles. He didn't know, until that moment, that Mara would be here. He watched her across the room, standing now with a glass of water she wasn't drinking, watching Philip the way you watch someone you used to know, and are now trying to calculate. What version of yourself do you have to be to survive the next 2 hours in the same room as him? Then Philip saw her. The thing about Philip Grantham was that he had never, in all the years Corbin had known him, done a single unkind thing subtly. Everything was a performance. So when he walked over to Mara, Lisette on his arm, and the smile on his face shifted into something that was not quite a smile anymore. Something that said, "Look at what I have now, and look at what you don't." Corbin felt something move in his chest that he hadn't expected to feel. He started walking before he'd made any conscious decision to walk. He heard Philip say, "Mara, I didn't think you'd actually come," in the tone of someone who absolutely thought she'd come and had been counting on it. He heard Mara say very quietly, "Philip," and nothing else. He heard Lisette say something he didn't catch, and heard the small, controlled laugh that followed it. And then Corbin was there. He stepped up beside Mara, close enough that their arms nearly touched, and said, in the most natural voice he owned, "There you are. I've been looking for you." The look on Mara's face when she turned to him was something he would carry for a long time. Shock first, then something desperate and searching. And then, because she was clearly someone who had learned to think fast, something settled in her eyes, and she said, "I was saying hello. I can see that." He extended a hand to Philip. "Corbin Whitfield." Philip shook it, and the calculation behind his eyes was immediate and obvious. Philip knew who Corbin Whitfield was. Everyone in this room knew who Corbin Whitfield was. Philip Grantham. "This is my fiancée, Lisette Arnaud. Congratulations," Corbin said pleasantly. "Mara and I don't want to keep you. I'm sure you have 100 people to get to tonight." It was a perfect dismissal, framed as a courtesy. Philip had no choice but to take it. He left, and he took Lisette with him, and when they were far enough away, Corbin felt Mara exhale beside him. Not loudly, but he felt it. She turned to him. Up close, her eyes were darker than he'd expected. Brown with something almost amber in them depending on the light. "I don't know you," she said, not unfriendly, just stating a fact. "No," he agreed. She stopped. "Why did you do that?" Corbin looked at her for a moment. She held eye contact, which not everyone did with him. He'd noticed, over the years, that a lot of people found him difficult to look at directly, not for any reason he'd ever fully understood. Something about the way he went still when he was thinking. "You looked like you needed a door," he said. She blinked. A door, an exit, a redirect. Something. She was quiet for a moment, then. "That's a strange reason to help someone you don't know." "Maybe," he said. "Are you all right?" And something in her face changed when he asked that. Not the polished, composed change he was used to seeing in people who were managing impressions in rooms like this one. A real change. A flicker of something that was almost painfully honest. "No," she said. Then, immediately, "But I'll be fine." "I know," he said. "I can see that about you." She studied him. He wasn't sure what she was looking for. Whatever it was, she seemed to find enough of it because she said, quietly enough that no one else could hear, "Would you be willing to stay with me for a little while? Just act like we're together, just for tonight. I know it's a ridiculous thing to ask a complete stranger." "I know." She stopped. "Philip is watching. And I don't want him to think that I—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Corbin Whitfield said yes. He said it simply, without performance, without making her feel the weight of the ask. He said yes the way you say yes when the answer was already decided. What he didn't tell her, what he had no intention of telling her, not tonight, possibly not ever, was that the answer had been decided a very long time ago. He was 11 years old the first time he met Mara Stanton. She wouldn't have known him as Corbin Whitfield then. He went by Corbin Price in those days. His mother's name, before she died, before he went into the foster system in Winnipeg and started the long, grinding process of becoming someone else. He was small for his age and quiet in the way that children become quiet when quiet is safer than the alternative. He had learned not to draw attention and had gotten very good at it. The community center on McGregor Street ran programs on weekends. After school stuff during the week. Saturday morning activities for kids who didn't have anywhere else to be. Corbin went because it was warm and because the woman who ran the front desk always had granola bars, and he'd learned that if you arrived early enough, you could usually get two. The dance program was not something he'd intended to go to. He'd gotten turned around looking for the room with the board games. Someone had moved the sign, and ended up in the doorway of a studio with pale wood floors and a mirror that ran the length of the far wall. She was teaching a class. She couldn't have been more than 22 or 23. She was showing a small group of kids some kind of movement. Not ballet, exactly. Something more informal, contemporary, the kind of thing designed to get children comfortable in their own bodies before worrying about whether it looked like anything. She was laughing at something one of the kids had done, and it was a real laugh. The kind that takes over your whole face. Corbin stood in the doorway longer than he meant to. She noticed him when the class was transitioning and walked over with the easy confidence of someone who had never been afraid of empty space. "Are you here for the class?" she asked. He said no. He said he was looking for something else. She nodded, and then she said, "You're welcome to stay and watch if you want, or join if you change your mind." He didn't join. He did stay. He sat in the corner on the floor with his back against the wall and watched the whole hour. He didn't know why. There was just something about being in that room. The light. The music she played on a small Bluetooth speaker, the way she corrected the kids so gently that they didn't even know they were being corrected. That made him feel something he didn't have a word for then, though he'd found the word later. Safe. He came back the next Saturday, and the one after that. She learned his name after the third week. He learned hers from the sheet of paper taped to the studio door. Contemporary movement, 10:11 a.m., instructor, Mara Stanton. He never joined the class. He watched. Sometimes she'd come sit with him in the corner for a few minutes after class ended and ask him things in the careful way. Adults sometimes ask children things when they want to know how the child is doing without making the child feel examined. He answered honestly when it felt safe and deflected when it didn't, and she seemed to understand the difference. One afternoon, about 2 months in, he had a bad week. He didn't intend for it to show. He was very practiced at not letting things show. But she sat down beside him after class and didn't say anything for a while, and then said, "You don't have to be okay all the time. You know that, right?" He didn't say anything. She said, "Whatever it is you're carrying, it's going to get lighter eventually. I know that probably sounds like something adults say and it doesn't help, but I mean it specifically, not in general." She paused. "You're going to be fine, Corbin. I genuinely believe that. He was 11 years old and no one had said his name like that, like it was worth something, in a very long time. He believed her. He didn't know why, he just did. He went back the following winter and the center told him the dance program had ended. Budget cuts. Mara Stanton was not teaching there anymore. He never saw her again. He kept going. He did what she said. He got lighter eventually. Not all at once, but piece by piece, the way hard things actually happen if you're patient with them. He finished school. He got a scholarship. He built Whitfield Capital from a two-person operation in a rented office in Calgary into something that appeared, regularly, on lists he'd once read about from the outside. He hired good people and paid them well and remembered, always, what it felt like to be in a room where no one expected anything of you but your presence. He thought about her sometimes. Not constantly. Just the way you think about a room you once stood in that changed something in the architecture of you. He'd found out she was in Toronto about 4 years ago. Not intentionally. A name on a guest list for an Arts Foundation dinner, the kind of detail that goes past most people, but tends to catch Corbin when he's paying attention, which is always. He hadn't approached her. He'd sat across the room and confirmed that she was real, and that she seemed well, and that was enough. He wasn't someone who confused gratitude with entitlement. She had done something for an 11-year-old boy she barely knew, and she'd moved on as she should have. The debt was not hers. He'd seen her twice since then in passing, once at a gallery opening, once on King Street in the rain, moving fast under an umbrella, not looking up. He'd never said anything. It felt like the right call. Tonight was different. Tonight, he hadn't been able to walk past her. They stayed together for 2 hours. It wasn't difficult. Corbin was good at social performance when he needed to be. 30 years of practice, most of it motivated by survival. And Mara, it turned out, was good at it too, though for different reasons. She was a teacher. Elementary school, she told him. Grade 4 currently. She'd been at the same school in the East End for 6 years. You don't seem like someone who became what they planned to be, he said. They were standing near the windows by then, the party noise settling into something easier around them. She looked at him. What does that mean? It means I think you're more than what you're describing. The way you described the school, the kids. He paused. You lit up. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I used to dance. What happened? A lot of things. She said it without self-pity, which he noticed. It's fine. I love the kids. I really do. It's just, sometimes when you're in a room with everyone from your old life, you feel like you're supposed to be something you're not anymore. She glanced toward Philip's table. He always made me feel like what I became was a consolation prize. He's wrong, Corbin said. She laughed a little. You don't know that. I know consolation prizes, he said. I've been offered a lot of them. What you're describing isn't that. She looked at him, really looked, with the same searching quality she'd had when he first stepped in beside her. Why are you being so kind to me? He had thought, at different points in the evening, about whether he would tell her. Not the whole story. The whole story was too much for a night like this. Too much weight to put on someone who hadn't asked for it. But something. I think I met you once, he said. A long time ago. She frowned. Where? A community center in Winnipeg, McGregor Street. You were teaching a movement class on Saturday mornings. I was about 11. She went very still. You probably don't remember, he said. There were a lot of kids. I remember, she said. He looked at her. I remember a boy who used to sit in the corner, she said slowly. He never joined the class. He came for, I don't know, almost a full year? And then one week he just wasn't there anymore. She stopped. I thought about him sometimes. I always wondered if he was okay. Corbin didn't say anything for a moment. I was okay, he said finally. I want you to know that. I was okay because, in part for a while, when it was hard, because of that room, and because of what you said. He stopped himself there, because his voice had gone somewhere he hadn't meant it to go. He steadied it. You said, you're going to be fine, Corbin. And I believed you. And I kept believing it, when there wasn't much else to believe. Mara Stanton looked at him in the middle of Philip Grantham's engagement party with the chandelier light coming down around them, and the expression on her face was the most honest thing Corbin had seen in years. I had no idea, she said very quietly. You weren't supposed to, he said. You were just doing your job. Or not even your job, just being a decent person. He looked at her steadily. That's not a small thing. I know it feels small from the inside. It wasn't. She pressed her fingers to her mouth for just a moment. Her eyes were very bright. I've wondered my whole life, she said, voice careful, controlled. Whether it mattered, whether any of it, the teaching, the small things you do for kids you can barely reach, whether it actually means anything. Whether it lands. It lands, he said. The string quartet across the room had moved to something slower. The room had settled into the comfortable middle of a long event. People looser now, louder, less careful. She said, "What's your name?" "Your real name. You said Whitfield, but it's my name now," he said. "I took it legally when I was 24. My mother's family name." He paused. "Her name was Eleanor Whitfield. She died when I was 9. Before the rest of it, Corbin Whitfield," Mara said, as if she was placing something, recognizing the shape of it. "Corbin Price when you knew me," he said. "Price was a foster placement. It didn't stick." She nodded slowly. Something in her had settled too. "You built something real," she said. It wasn't as a compliment exactly, more like an observation. Like she was putting the boy in the corner and the man in front of her together, and finding that the line between them made sense. "I tried to," he said. "You told me I would. I held on to that." Philip Grantham appeared at the edge of their conversation then. Not intentionally, just orbiting. The way people orbit when they can feel that something is happening they weren't invited to, and they want to understand what they're missing. Corbin watched him clock the distance between Corbin and Mara. The quality of the conversation. The way Mara was looking at someone who was looking back at her the same way. Philip's face did something small and involuntary that Corbin recognized from conference rooms. The expression of a man recalibrating. Corbin did not look at Philip. "Are you all right to be here for the rest of it?" he asked Mara. She considered the question seriously, which he appreciated. "Yes," she said. "Actually, yes. I think I am." "Good." She looked at him for a moment. "I'm glad you came tonight." "So am I," he said. She hesitated. Then, "Can I ask you something strange?" "Go ahead. Did you know I'd be here?" "Tonight? When you decided to come?" It was a good question. He'd asked it himself in the car on the way over, when he was deciding whether to be honest with himself about his reasons. "I knew you were connected to Philip," he said. "I didn't know for certain you'd be here. I told myself I wasn't coming because of that." He paused. "I may not have been entirely truthful with myself." She was quiet for a moment. Then she laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that takes over the whole face. He recognized it. He had been 11 years old the first time he saw it, standing in a doorway, not sure why he'd stopped walking. "That's the most honest thing anyone said to me in months," she said. "I'm trying to be honest more often," he said. "It's a work in progress." "Aren't we all?" she said. They stayed another hour. They talked about Toronto and about Winnipeg, and about what it was like to be from somewhere cold and end up somewhere that only pretended to understand cold. They talked about her students. One in particular, a 7-year-old named apparently everyone called him just Benji, who had recently announced to his class that he wanted to be either an astronaut or a professional napper, and was treating both options with equal seriousness. They talked about what Corbin actually did. Not the title, not the press version, but the actual work of it, the part where you have to decide what you believe about people and then act accordingly every single day. She asked good questions. She listened to the answers. He had not talked to anyone like this in a long time, maybe ever. It was the strangest thing. He had been in rooms with heads of state, with people who ran companies older than the country, with people who could shift the price of things with a phone call. He was comfortable in those rooms. He was good at them. This was different. This was someone looking at him the same way she'd looked at that boy in the corner, without agenda, without the particular kind of weighing that happened in his world, and saying, without saying it out loud, "I see you." He hadn't known how much he's someone to do that until she did it. When the party started winding down, coats appearing, taxis being called, Philip Grantham holding court near the exit, and accepting congratulations with the ease of a man who had expected them, Corbin walked Mara out through the lobby. At the door, she turned to face him. The night outside was the particular cool of early October in Toronto, the leaves already turning on the trees along the boulevard, a wind that hadn't made up its mind yet about whether it was serious. "Thank you," she said, "for all of it, the beginning, and everything after. You saved me first," he said. "I was just returning it." She shook her head slowly. "I didn't do anything. You did the thing you do without knowing you're doing it," he said. "You made someone feel like they counted, when they had very little evidence that they did." He looked at her. "That's not nothing, Mara." She held his gaze. "No," she said quietly. "I suppose it isn't." A cab pulled up at the curb. "Hers," she said. She'd called it from inside. She took a step toward it and then stopped, turned back. "Corbin, yes, if I gave you my number," she said slowly, choosing her words the way she'd done all evening when she was being very careful to say what she actually meant. "Would you use it? Not out of whatever this is. Not out of the history of it. Just," she stopped, "because I'd like to talk to you again. About something other than all of this." "Yes," he said. He said it simply, without performance, the way you say yes when the answer was already decided. She smiled, and there it was again, the real one, the one that took over the whole face. She gave him her number and got into the cab, and Corbin Whitfield stood on the sidewalk in front of the Fairmont in the October wind and watched the taillights disappear down the street. He stood there a moment longer than was strictly necessary. There was a version of this story, he supposed, that was about Philip Grantham, and the expression on his face when he'd realized something was happening he didn't understand. There was a version that was about coming full circle, about one small act of kindness, compounding over 30 years into something neither person involved could have predicted. Corbin didn't think of it that way. He didn't think in those terms. He thought about a community center on McGregor Street and pale wood floors, and a woman who had once sat down next to a boy who didn't know how to ask for help, and had said simply, like it was obvious, "You're going to be fine." He had believed her then. Standing on the sidewalk with the wind off the lake at his back, and his phone already in his hand, her number sitting in it like an answer to a question he'd carried for 30 years, he believed her still.